In this video, we're going to go through how to do the independent samples t-test using G-Power. So our research scenario is there a difference in self-efficacy depending on leadership type, transformational versus transactional. And just to be clear, self-efficacy is a self-efficacy score. So we're interested in comparing that numeric variable and see if there's a difference based on two groups, transformational versus transactional. It is also anticipated that there will be equal numbers in each group, so that we'll have approximately the same number of transformational people as transactional. Now, this does not mean that they have to be identical. It just means that we don't think that there will be, an abnormally large number of one group compared to the other. And that has to do with that allocation ratio that basically we just think it's a 1-to-1 allocation ratio. So in terms of setting this up, let's go ahead and open up G-Power. So there is our G-Power. Nicely enough, G-Power opens up automatically to t-tests. So we do want a t-test, but we want a t-test where it's the means, the difference between two independent means or two groups. Also, just in case you were curious, if you were doing a paired samples t-test, this would be the correct option. But because we are doing an independent samples t-test, it is this option right there. Now, we always select a priori. That just means that we are trying to figure out the sample size before we collect our data. Now, because we are always doing this, because you will have to actually do this for your IRB as well as Chapter 3. So you do have to do G-Power for your IRB and Chapter 3 if you are doing a quantitative dissertation. We're just always going to be a priori. For tails, we want to make sure and change that to two-tailed. In almost every case for what we're going to be doing or what you'll likely be doing for your dissertation, you do want to change that to a two-tailed test. Now, nicely enough, if you mouse over, JASP will tell you, like, hey, or JASP, I'm sorry, G-Power will tell you, hey, we automatically defaulted to the medium sample size or effect size. And that's what we're going to want is that medium effect size. So really important, we always want the medium effect size. And nicely enough, JASP just goes ahead, oh my gosh, G-Power just goes ahead and defaults to that medium effect size. Now, our error of probability, always 0.05, but then that power, if you remember what we talked about when we were going over kind of the basics of power, sample size, all of that, we actually want it to 0.80. Now, it doesn't have to be 0.80, it can just be 0.8, it's the same thing, but we're used to seeing 0.80, and so that's just kind of normally what I do. Now, if we can assume that 1-to-1 allocation ratio, which for most cases you would assume a 1-to-1 ratio, the only time you wouldn't is if something in your research literature indicated that there are more of one group than the other just in the naturally occurring population. But in this case, we're going to leave it as a 1-to-1, which 1-to-1, just 1 divided by 1 is 1, so we'll leave it alone, and click Calculate. So our total sample size needed for an independent samples t-test is 128. So if you were going out doing an independent samples t-test, you would need 128 as your minimum sample size. Now, just in case you were curious, what if it was a 2-to-1 allocation ratio? Well, if you change it there, then you can see it's going to go ahead and increase your total sample size. But you might wonder, well, how do I know it's 2-to-1 and not 1-to-2? Like, is that going to change things? Just to show that it doesn't matter, because a 1-to-2 ratio would just be 1 divided by 2, so half or 0.5. And you can still see it's still the same thing. So G-Power is really nice in that it understands 0.5 and 2 when it comes to a ratio are the same thing. So, but in general, you will be using that 1-to-1 ratio. I just wanted to show you like what that allocation ratio is and how it might change your work. But that is all you need for the independent samples t-test, except how do we write this up? So in terms of written results, so for your discussion or if you're doing this for your dissertation, you would go ahead and give the research question scenario. Then for that statistical test, you would indicate it is a independent samples t-test. Purpose of using G-Power, you should always add that purpose. I'm not going to tell you because we already talked about it and you can look it up, but you would definitely want to add a citation, and this is for your dissertation as well as our class. And then this is what you would say. So for this research question, a G-power analysis was done a priori to establish a rigorous sample size. Then you do your power, your effect size, your alpha. The results from G-power indicate a minimum sample size of 128. See Appendix X. And Appendix X would just be your G-power output. So to be clear, for the discussion, you do need your G-power output. If you're doing this for your dissertation or an IRB, you also need the G-power output. So you're always going to need that G-power output as part of your results. I hope this helps, and if you have any questions, let me know.